The morning Maya received the call from her boss asking why she hadn't shown up to the quarterly board meeting, she was standing in her kitchen in pajamas, holding a cup of coffee that suddenly felt too heavy in her hands. She had never missed a meeting in her 3 years at Richardson Associates. More importantly, she had never been scheduled for one that Thursday morning. But according to her boss, she had not only been scheduled, she had confirmed her attendance the day before. The voice on the other end of the line belonged to someone who had just watched her twin sister Zara walk into that boardroom, shake hands with executives, and deliver a presentation using Maya's research, Maya's ideas, and Maya's name. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Maya Chen had always known that sharing a face with someone else came with complications, but she never imagined it would cost her everything she had worked for. At 26, she had built a reputation as one of the most promising marketing analysts at Richardson Associates, a prestigious consulting firm in downtown Seattle. Her twin sister Zara, identical in every physical way but opposite in every moral dimension, had spent those same 26 years perfecting the art of taking shortcuts through other people's achievements. The phone call that Thursday morning in October was just the beginning. As Maya stood frozen in her kitchen, listening to her boss Marcus Richardson explain how disappointed he was in her unprofessional behavior, the pieces of a puzzle she hadn't even known existed began falling into place. The missed emails that her IT department insisted had been responded to, the client meetings that colleagues mentioned in passing, meetings Maya had no memory of attending, the promotion opportunity that had mysteriously disappeared without explanation 3 months earlier. Marcus's voice crackled through the phone speaker, professional, but clearly frustrated. He explained that Maya, or rather the person he believed to be Maya, had just given an impressive presentation on the Hartwell Industries account, the very project Maya had been developing in secret for weeks. The presentation had gone so well, in fact, that the senior partners were considering fast-tracking her for the associate director position that would be opening in January. Maya's hands trembled as she set down her coffee mug. She tried to explain that she was at home, that she had never been scheduled for any meeting, but Marcus's tone suggested he thought she was having some sort of breakdown. He recommended she take the rest of the day off and suggested she might want to consider speaking to someone about her apparent memory issues. The call ended with Maya staring at her phone, the silence of her apartment suddenly deafening. The realization hit her like a physical blow. Zara had been impersonating her at work. Growing up as identical twins in Portland, Maya and Zara had been mistaken for each other countless times, but their personalities had diverged early and dramatically. Maya was the twin who studied late into the night, who saved birthday money instead of spending it immediately, who helped classmates with homework without expecting anything in return. Zara was the twin who figured out how to forge their mother's signature in 3rd grade, who convinced teachers that Maya had agreed to let her copy homework, who could cry on command whenever consequences appeared on the horizon. Their parents, David and Linda Chen, had always dismissed the differences between their daughters as normal sibling rivalry. When Maya complained that Zara had stolen her science project idea and won the 7th grade science fair, their mother had sighed and said that imitation was the sincerest flattery. When Maya discovered that Zara had been using her name to get better grades by showing up to Maya's advanced classes and taking tests in her place, their father had chuckled and called it creative problem solving. The pattern had been established early. Zara took what she wanted, Maya dealt with the consequences, and their parents treated it as harmless twin mischief. By high school, Maya had learned to guard her achievements carefully, but Zara had learned to be more subtle in her theft. When Maya won a scholarship to University of Washington, Zara managed to convince the admissions office that there had been a clerical error and that both twins deserved the financial aid. When Maya landed her first internship at a marketing firm during college, Zara showed up on days Maya was sick and impressed everyone with her charm and confidence, taking credit for Maya's research and strategic thinking. The only person who had ever seen through Zara's manipulations was their grandmother, Nai, who had lived with the family during the twins' teenage years.
Nine had a way of looking at Zara that suggested she could see straight through to whatever calculating mechanism drove her granddaughter's decisions. She would mutter in Mandarin about children who took what didn't belong to them, and she made a point of praising Maya's genuine accomplishments while treating Zara's supposed achievements with polite skepticism. When Nine passed away during the twins' junior year of college, she left behind a small inheritance with specific instructions. Maya was to receive the bulk of the money, but only if she could prove she had achieved something entirely on her own merit, something that couldn't be stolen or replicated. The will had been oddly specific about documentation and verification, as if Nine had anticipated exactly the kind of problem that would later unfold. After college, Maya and Zara had moved to different cities, ostensibly to pursue their own careers. Maya had landed her position at Richardson Associates through a competitive application process, multiple interviews, and a presentation of her senior thesis research. She had worked 60-hour weeks for 3 years, building relationships with clients, developing innovative strategies, and slowly earning the respect of her colleagues. Her small apartment in Capitol Hill reflected her careful financial management and dedication to her career, filled with marketing books, industry publications, and the kind of organized workspace that suggested someone who took their professional development seriously. Zara, meanwhile, had moved to LA with vague plans about working in entertainment marketing. Her social media presence suggested a life filled with networking events, expensive restaurants, and designer clothing that didn't match any reasonable entry-level salary. Maya had assumed her sister was living beyond her means, possibly supported by their parents or a series of generous boyfriends. She had never considered that Zara might be living beyond her means by living Maya's life. The morning after the phone call with Marcus, Maya sat in her home office staring at her laptop screen, trying to piece together a timeline that made sense. She pulled up her work email and began scrolling through months of messages, looking for anything that seemed off. What she found was worse than she had imagined. There were dozens of emails in her sent folder that she had never written, responses to client inquiries that sounded like her professional voice, but contained subtle differences in tone and phrasing, meeting confirmations for appointments she had never scheduled. Most disturbingly, there were internal emails to colleagues discussing projects and strategies that Maya had only outlined in her personal notes, ideas she had been developing privately before proposing them to the team. The timestamps on the emails revealed a pattern. The messages were always sent during hours when Maya was either at home or traveling for personal reasons. Days when she had called in sick, weekends when she was visiting her parents, the afternoon she had left early for a dentist appointment. Maya opened her calendar application and cross-referenced the dates of the suspicious emails with her own schedule. Every single message had been sent when she had documented reasons for being away from the office. Someone had been monitoring her schedule, waiting for opportunities to step into her professional life and make decisions in her name. The realization that someone had been accessing her work accounts led Maya to check her personal digital footprint.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Her social media profiles showed recent activity that she didn't remember. Professional networking posts that sounded like her writing style but referenced events she hadn't attended and achievements she hadn't accomplished. Her LinkedIn profile had been updated with project details and client successes that belonged to work she had done, but the updates had been made during times when she was away from her computer. Maya's hands shook as she scrolled through months of digital evidence that someone had been living portions of her professional life. The sophistication of the deception was breathtaking. Whoever was doing this knew her writing style well enough to replicate it convincingly. They knew her work well enough to build on her ideas and present them as ongoing developments rather than sudden inspirations. They knew her schedule well enough to avoid being in 2 places at once. But the most chilling realization was that whoever was doing this had physical access to her workplace and enough familiarity with her colleagues to maintain the illusion in person. This wasn't just digital identity theft. Someone was physically impersonating her, walking into her office building, sitting in her meetings, and convincing people who saw her every day that they were interacting with Maya Chen. There was only one person in the world who could pull off such a comprehensive deception. Maya picked up her phone and dialed Zara's number for the first time in 6 months. The call went straight to voicemail, but the outgoing message made Maya's stomach drop.
Instead of Zara's usual casual greeting, the message was professional, polished, exactly the kind of voicemail greeting Maya might use for business contacts. When the beep sounded, Maya found herself unable to speak. What could she say? Accusations that sounded insane even to her own ears? She hung up and immediately called back, and this time, Zara answered on the second ring. Maya, hi, this is such perfect timing. I was just thinking about you. Zara's voice carried the same warm familiarity it had always had, but there was something underneath it now, something that sounded like satisfaction. Were you thinking about me while you were sitting in my office this morning? Maya asked, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. There was a pause that lasted 3 seconds too long. When Zara spoke again, her tone had shifted to something more cautious. I'm not sure what you mean. I'm in LA, Maya. I haven't been to Seattle in months. Marcus Richardson called me this morning. He was disappointed that I missed the quarterly board meeting. Except I was never scheduled for a quarterly board meeting, Zara. But apparently, someone who looked exactly like me was there, giving a presentation on the Hartwell Industries account. Another pause, shorter this time, followed by a laugh that sounded forced. That's really weird. Maybe one of your colleagues got confused about who was supposed to be there? You know how corporate environments can be with communication mix-ups. Maya felt a familiar sensation, the same feeling she had experienced countless times growing up when Zara would deny something Maya had witnessed with her own eyes. It was the specific frustration that came from being gaslighted by someone who knew exactly which buttons to push and how to make reality seem negotiable. The person who gave the presentation knew details about the Hartwell account that I've never shared with anyone, research I've been doing privately, strategies I developed in my personal notes at home. Maya's voice remained calm, but her grip on the phone tightened. How would you explain that? Maya, you're starting to scare me. Are you feeling all right? Maybe you did attend the meeting and you're having some kind of memory issue. Stress can do really strange things to people. Maybe you should talk to someone. The suggestion was delivered with perfect sisterly concern, but Maya recognized the tactic. Zara had always been skilled at redirecting focus from her own behavior to Maya's supposed problems. Growing up, whenever Maya had caught Zara in a lie or confronted her about stolen ideas, Zara would express worry about Maya's mental state, her tendency to be paranoid, her difficulty accepting that good things could happen to other people. I'm going to ask you directly, and I want you to tell me the truth. Have you been impersonating me at my job? Maya, I love you, but you need to listen to yourself right now. You're accusing me of somehow traveling to Seattle, sneaking into your office building, and pretending to be you in front of people who see you every day. Don't you think that sounds a little far-fetched? It did sound far-fetched when Zara put it that way. Maya felt the familiar doubt creeping in, the same doubt that had plagued her throughout childhood whenever her version of events conflicted with Zara's confident denials. But this time, Maya had something she had never had before: documentation. I have emails in my sent folder that I never wrote, Zara. Messages sent while I was provably somewhere else. Calendar appointments I never made. LinkedIn updates I never posted. Someone has been accessing my accounts and living pieces of my professional life. Have you considered that maybe your accounts were hacked? Identity theft is really common these days. You should probably change all your passwords and maybe contact the police. Although Zara's voice took on a thoughtful tone, I'm not sure they'll take it seriously if you can't prove any financial damage. The conversation continued for another 10 minutes, with Zara maintaining her innocence while simultaneously offering practical advice for dealing with the situation Maya was describing. It was a masterful performance, combining just the right amount of concern, confusion, and helpfulness to make Maya question her own conclusions. But when Maya hung up the phone, she realized something had changed. For the first time in her life, she wasn't doubting herself. The evidence was too clear, too comprehensive, too specifically targeted to be the work of some random hacker. Only someone with intimate knowledge of Maya's work, her writing style, her schedule, and her physical appearance could have pulled off such an elaborate deception. Maya spent the rest of the day creating a detailed timeline of the suspicious activities she had discovered. She printed emails, took screenshots of social media updates, and documented every instance where her digital footprint suggested she had been in two places at once. The pattern that emerged was even more disturbing than she had initially realized. The impersonation hadn't been random or opportunistic. It had been systematic and strategic. Zara had been carefully studying Maya's professional life, learning her routines, understanding her projects, and waiting for the right moments to step in and claim credit for Maya's work. The quarterly board meeting wasn't the beginning of the deception. It was the culmination of months of careful preparation. Maya realized that her promotion had probably disappeared because Zara had been positioning herself for it, gradually building relationships with senior management and associating Maya's ideas with face-to-face interactions that Maya herself had never had. The missed emails and mysterious meeting references were probably the result of Zara scheduling appointments and commitments that Maya knew nothing about, creating a professional reputation built on Maya's expertise, but Zara's networking skills. The scope of the betrayal was breathtaking. Zara hadn't just stolen Maya's identity, she had been methodically stealing Maya's career one interaction at a time. And the most brilliant part of the scheme was that Maya's colleagues would never believe her if she tried to explain what was happening. How could she prove that the person they had been seeing and working with wasn't really her? That evening, Maya made a decision that would change everything. She opened her laptop and began researching private investigators who specialized in identity theft and corporate fraud. If Zara thought she could steal Maya's life without consequences, she was about to learn otherwise. Maya had spent 26 years being the twin who accepted unfairness and moved on. That twin was about to disappear forever. The next morning, Maya called in sick to work for the first time in over a year. She had phone calls to make, evidence to gather, and a trap to set. Zara had been playing a long game, but Maya was about to change the rules entirely. The person who had spent her whole life stealing other people's achievements was about to discover what it felt like to have everything taken away. The private investigator Maya hired was nothing like what she had expected. Elena Vasquez operated out of a sleek office in South Lake Union, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked Elliott Bay and a wall of diplomas that suggested expertise in both digital forensics and corporate espionage. When Maya had called to explain her situation, Elena had listened without interruption and scheduled a meeting for the same day, as if cases involving identical twins committing elaborate identity theft were routine occurrences. Elena's first question during their meeting had been simple but telling. She had asked Maya to provide a comprehensive list of every password, security question, and digital account she had ever created. The exercise took 2 hours and revealed a disturbing truth. Maya's digital security was comprehensive by normal standards, but completely inadequate for someone being targeted by an identical twin with intimate knowledge of her personal history. Elena explained that identity theft between family members was often the most sophisticated and hardest to detect, because the perpetrator had access to information that no outside hacker could obtain. Birth dates, childhood addresses, pet names, favorite teachers, the kinds of personal details that formed the backbone of security questions were all shared family knowledge. More problematically, identical twins often had access to each other's biometric data through old medical records, school files, and family photographs that could be used to create false identification documents. The investigation Elena proposed was methodical and comprehensive. She would install monitoring software on Maya's devices to track any unauthorized access attempts. She would conduct surveillance of Maya's workplace to document when Zara appeared there versus when Maya was present. Most importantly, she would work with a forensic accountant to trace any financial benefits Zara might have gained from her identity theft scheme. Maya authorized the investigation with a mixture of determination and dread. Part of her hoped that Elena would find evidence that would quickly resolve the situation. Another part of her feared what they might discover about the extent of Zara's deception and how long it had been going on. While Elena began her investigation, Maya faced the immediate challenge of returning to work without knowing how much damage had already been done to her professional reputation. She couldn't explain to her colleagues what she suspected without sounding paranoid or unstable. She couldn't confront Zara directly without alerting her to Maya's investigation. She had to pretend that everything was normal while carefully monitoring every interaction for signs that people were seeing her differently. The first day back at the office was surreal. Maya arrived early, before most of her colleagues, and spent an hour reviewing her computer files and email accounts for any changes that might have occurred during her sick day. Everything appeared normal, but she had learned not to trust appearances. She had Elena's monitoring software running in the background, recording every keystroke and login attempt. Marcus Richardson stopped by her desk around 10 in the morning carrying a coffee and wearing the kind of concerned expression that suggested he was checking on an employee he was worried about. His greeting was cautious, as if he wasn't entirely sure which version of Maya he was talking to. "Feeling better today?" he asked, settling into the chair beside her desk that was usually reserved for client meetings. Maya nodded, keeping her expression neutral. "Much better, thank you. I think I just needed some rest."
Marcus studied her face with an intensity that made Maya's stomach clench. She realized he was probably comparing her current demeanor to whatever impression Zara had made during the board meeting. The thought that her boss was evaluating her against an imposter's performance was both infuriating and terrifying. "I wanted to follow up on our conversation about the Hartwell presentation," Marcus continued. "Your work on that account has been exceptional, but I was concerned about some of the confusion around your schedule and availability. The senior partners were impressed with your strategic thinking, but they also noticed some inconsistencies in your communication style and project management approach." Maya felt ice forming in her veins. The senior partners had been comparing her real work with Zara's performance and finding discrepancies. Zara had apparently been impressive enough to get their attention, but different enough from Maya's usual approach to create confusion about her professional capabilities. "I appreciate the feedback," Maya said carefully. "Could you be more specific about the inconsistencies they noticed?" Marcus shifted in his chair, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. "Well, for example, your presentation style during the board meeting was much more aggressive and self-promoting than your usual approach. You made some claims about your role in other successful projects that seemed, well, exaggerated compared to how you usually describe your contributions." Maya realized that Zara had been not only stealing credit for Maya's current work, but also retroactively claiming credit for Maya's past achievements. The presentation had apparently been a masterclass in professional aggrandizement, delivered with the kind of confidence that Maya had always struggled to project but that Zara had never lacked. "I see," Maya said, buying time to think. "I suppose I was trying to be more assertive about highlighting my contributions. Sometimes I think I'm too modest about my work." Marcus nodded, but his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. "That's true, you do tend to be very collaborative in how you present your achievements. The partners appreciated seeing you advocate for yourself more strongly. They just want to make sure that your claims about past projects are accurate when they're considering you for the associate director position." Maya's heart stopped. The associate director position was exactly what she had been working toward for 3 years. It was the promotion that would establish her career trajectory and financial security. The idea that Zara had not only stolen credit for Maya's work but had also positioned herself as a candidate for Maya's dream job was almost too much to process. "I understand their concern," Maya managed to say. "I'll make sure to provide detailed documentation of my contributions to any projects they want to review." Marcus smiled, seemingly relieved that Maya was taking the feedback well. "Excellent. I think once they see your track record laid out clearly, they'll be very impressed. Your work really has been outstanding, Maya. I just want to make sure you're presenting yourself in the best possible light." After Marcus left, Maya sat at her desk, staring at her computer screen without seeing it. Zara hadn't just been stealing her identity. She had been strategically positioning herself to steal Maya's entire career trajectory. The associate director position would come with a significant salary increase, stock options, and the kind of professional recognition that Maya had been building toward since college. Maya opened her personal email and sent Elena a brief message asking for an urgent meeting. She needed to know exactly what evidence they had gathered and how quickly they could move to stop Zara's scheme. Every day that passed was another opportunity for Zara to further cement her false claims and damage Maya's real reputation. Elena's response came within an hour, suggesting they meet at a coffee shop near Pike Place Market that evening. The location was public enough to avoid suspicion, but private enough for a detailed conversation about what Elena had discovered during her initial investigation. The coffee shop was crowded with tourists and local workers ending their day, providing perfect cover for a conversation that Maya hoped would give her the ammunition she needed to reclaim her life. Elena arrived carrying a tablet and a manila folder that looked promisingly thick with documentation. "I have good news and bad news," Elena began without preamble. "The good news is that your sister has been sloppy enough to leave a clear digital trail. The bad news is that this has been going on much longer and is much more extensive than you initially suspected."
Elena opened her tablet and showed Maya a timeline that made her stomach sink. According to Elena's investigation, Zara had been systematically accessing Maya's accounts for over 18 months. The earliest evidence dated back to Maya's first major client success at Richardson Associates, when Zara had apparently begun monitoring Maya's email and calendar to understand her work schedule and professional relationships. "She's been learning your job," Elena explained, scrolling through screenshots of login records and email timestamps. "Not just stealing credit for your work, but actually studying how you operate professionally so she could replicate it convincingly." The sophistication of Zara's approach was breathtaking. Elena's investigation had revealed that Zara had created fake social media profiles to connect with Maya's colleagues and clients, gradually building relationships that allowed her to gather information about Maya's projects and workplace dynamics. She had used a mail forwarding service to intercept correspondence addressed to Maya at their parents' house, including professional documents and industry publications that Maya had sent there during moves. Most damaging, Elena had discovered that Zara had been using Maya's professional credentials to secure consulting work with companies that competed with Richardson Associates. She had essentially been operating a shadow version of Maya's career, taking on freelance projects and building a client base using Maya's expertise and reputation. The financial component is where this becomes legally actionable. Elena opened the manila folder to reveal bank statements and contract documents. "She's been earning money using your identity and professional qualifications. That's wire fraud, identity theft, and potentially tax evasion if she hasn't been reporting the income properly." Maya's stare of the evidence spread across the small coffee shop table. The scope of Zara's deception was far beyond what she had imagined. This wasn't just about stealing credit for a few projects or impersonating her at work meetings. Zara had essentially created an alternative version of Maya's professional life, one that was generating income and building relationships that belonged to Maya. "How much money are we talking about?"
Maya asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Elena pulled out a summary sheet that made Maya's hands shake. Over the past 18 months, Zara had earned approximately $80,000 using Maya's identity and credentials. She had been charging premium rates for strategic consulting services, leveraging Maya's reputation and Richardson Associates' credibility to secure contracts with major corporations. The most recent contract she signed was with Hartwell Industries, Elena continued. They're paying her $40,000 to develop a market expansion strategy. The contract is signed with your name and lists your employment at Richardson Associates as the primary credential. Maya realized that Zara had essentially been running a competing business using Maya's identity as the foundation. Every success Zara achieved in this shadow career was built on Maya's actual expertise and professional relationships. Worse, if any of these consulting projects went poorly, or if clients discovered the deception, the damage to Maya's real reputation could be irreversible. "What's our next step?" Maya asked, trying to keep her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. Elena closed the tablet and leaned back in her chair. "We need to document everything carefully and then spring a trap that will force her to reveal herself publicly. The evidence we have is strong, but identity theft cases between family members can be difficult to prosecute if the perpetrator claims they had permission or if they can argue that the victim was complicit." Elena's plan was elegant in its simplicity. They would set up a situation where Zara would be forced to impersonate Maya in front of witnesses who knew the truth about her identity. The goal was to create an undeniable public revelation that would serve as evidence for both criminal charges and civil litigation. "Your boss mentioned that the senior partners want to review your past projects before making a decision about the associate director position," Elena said. "What if we used that review process to expose her?" Maya understood immediately. They could arrange for a meeting where Maya would be expected to defend her professional accomplishments in person, but they would ensure that Zara received the meeting invitation instead. When Zara showed up expecting to continue her impersonation scheme, she would be confronted with evidence of her deception in front of witnesses who could testify about what they observed. "The key is making sure she can't claim this was all a misunderstanding," Elena explained. "We need her to actively participate in the deception while people who know the truth are watching." Maya spent the rest of the evening working with Elena to design a trap that would give Zara enough rope to hang herself. They would need to coordinate with Marcus Richardson and probably with Richardson Associates' legal department to ensure that everything was documented properly and that Maya's own position at the company was protected. The plan they developed was complex but comprehensive. Maya would request a formal review meeting with the senior partners to discuss her qualifications for the associate director position. She would ensure that Zara learned about the meeting through her monitoring of Maya's email accounts. On the day of the meeting, Maya would arrive early with Alina and the company's legal counsel to explain the situation and prepare the partners for what they were about to witness. When Zara showed up expecting to continue her impersonation scheme, she would find herself in a room full of people who knew exactly who she was and what she had been doing. The confrontation would be recorded, documented, and witnessed by enough credible people to serve as evidence in both criminal and civil proceedings. The timeline Alina proposed was aggressive. They would need to set everything up within the next 2 weeks before Zara could do any more damage to Maya's reputation or career prospects. Maya would have to continue pretending that everything was normal while secretly preparing to expose 18 months of systematic identity theft. That night, Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling and thinking about the person her sister had become. The Zara she had grown up with had always been selfish and manipulative. But this level of calculated deception suggested something much darker. Zara hadn't just stolen Maya's work. She had studied Maya's life with the dedication of a professional impersonator, learning to replicate not just her appearance, but her professional voice, her strategic thinking, and her industry relationships. Maya realized that somewhere along the way, Zara had stopped seeing her as a sister and started seeing her as a resource to be exploited. The twin who had once shared a bedroom and borrowed clothes had become someone capable of systematically destroying Maya's career for personal gain. The betrayal was so comprehensive that Maya wasn't sure their relationship could ever be repaired, even if Zara faced consequences for her actions. But repair wasn't Maya's goal anymore. Her goal was justice, and thanks to Elena's investigation, justice was finally within reach. Zara had been playing a long game, but she had made the mistake of underestimating the twin she had always seen as the easier target. Maya was about to prove that being underestimated could be the most powerful weapon of all. The next morning, Maya walked into Richardson Associates with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in months. She had 18 months of stolen achievements to reclaim and a sister's betrayal to expose. The person who had spent her entire life taking credit for other people's work was about to discover what it felt like to face the consequences of her choices. Maya's first stop was Marcus Richardson's office, where she would begin the process of setting a trap that would change both their lives forever. She knocked on his door with steady hands, ready to begin the most important presentation of her career. This time, she would be the only person in the room speaking for Maya Chen. Marcus's expression shifted from confusion to concern to something approaching disbelief as Maya laid out the evidence of her sister's deception. The manila folder Elena had prepared sat open on his desk, filled with login records, email timestamps, and financial documents that painted a picture of systematic identity theft that had been occurring under his nose for over a year. "You're telling me," Marcus said slowly, running his hand through his graying hair, "that someone has been impersonating you at board meetings, client presentations, and networking events for 18 months, and none of us noticed?" I understood his incredulity. The idea that an identical twin could successfully infiltrate a workplace and fool colleagues who saw the real person every day sounded like something from a psychological thriller rather than corporate reality. But the evidence was undeniable, spread across his desk in neat chronological order. "The person you've been seeing at those events has access to all my research, my strategic thinking, and my professional knowledge. She's been studying my work and my communication style for years. She knows exactly how I think and how I approach problems because she's been monitoring my email accounts and reading my private project notes." Marcus picked up one of Alina's timeline documents, studying the correlation between Maya's documented absences from the office and the suspicious email activity in her accounts. His face grew darker as he traced the pattern of deception that had been unfolding in his own company. "The quarterly board meeting, when you called in confused about being scheduled and I thought you were having memory problems."
That was really her? That was Zara. And according to your feedback, she made quite an impression on the senior partners by taking credit for projects I've been developing and claiming achievements that belong to me. The legal implications were beginning to dawn on Marcus. Richardson Associates had unknowingly been represented to clients and partners by someone who had no authority to speak for the company. Contracts had potentially been discussed, strategies had been shared, and professional relationships had been built on false pretenses. "We need to involve our legal department immediately," Marcus said, reaching for his phone, "and we need to figure out how to contain the damage to our reputation and client relationships." Maya had anticipated this concern. Elena's investigation had revealed that Zara's impersonation activities at Richardson Associates had been limited to internal meetings and company events. The more lucrative consulting work she had been doing under Maya's name had been conducted independently, using Maya's credentials, but not directly involving the company. The good news is that she seems to have kept her freelance consulting work separate from her activities here, Maya said. She was careful not to create conflicts of interest that might expose her scheme. But that also means she's been operating a competing business using my identity and your company's reputation as credentials. Marcus's call to the legal department resulted in an emergency meeting scheduled for that afternoon. Richardson Associates General Counsel Patricia Webb was a sharp woman in her 50s who specialized in corporate security and employment law. When Maya finished explaining the situation, Patricia's first question was about documentation and evidence. Elena's investigation had been thorough enough to satisfy even Patricia's exacting standards. The digital forensics evidence clearly showed unauthorized access to Maya's accounts from IP addresses that traced back to Los Angeles, where Zara lived. The financial records proved that someone had been earning substantial income using Maya's professional identity. Most importantly, Elena had video surveillance footage of Zara entering the Richardson Associates building on days when Maya was documentably elsewhere. "This is one of the most sophisticated cases of professional identity theft I've encountered," Patricia said, reviewing the evidence. "The perpetrator has essentially created a parallel career using your credentials and expertise. The financial damages alone could support both criminal charges and significant civil liability." The plan that emerged from their afternoon meeting was more elaborate than what Maya and Elena had originally proposed. Rather than simply exposing Zara at a single meeting, they would create a coordinated trap that would document her criminal activity comprehensively enough to ensure successful prosecution. Patricia explained that they needed evidence of Zara actively defrauding both Richardson Associates and Maya's freelance clients. The single meeting exposure Elena had suggested might not provide enough documentation to prove the full scope of the scheme. Instead, they would orchestrate a series of interactions over the course of a week that would force Zara to commit multiple documented acts of fraud. The first phase of their plan involved Maya requesting the formal review meeting with senior partners that Marcus had mentioned. They would schedule the meeting for the following Friday and ensure that Zara learned about it through her monitoring of Maya's email accounts. However, instead of simply ambushing her at the meeting, they would use the week leading up to it to gather additional evidence. Elena would coordinate with law enforcement to ensure that Zara's activities were being monitored and recorded throughout the week. Maya would maintain her normal schedule while secretly working with Patricia to document every instance of unauthorized account access and fraudulent communication. The masterstroke of their plan involved Zara's freelance consulting work. Patricia had contacted Meridian Industries, the company that had hired Zara for the $40,000 market expansion project. Rather than immediately revealing the fraud, they had worked with Meridian's legal team to set up a final presentation meeting where Zara would be expected to deliver her completed strategy recommendations. The meeting with Meridian was scheduled for Thursday, the day before Maya's review meeting with Richardson Associates senior partners. Zara would arrive expecting to complete her consulting project and collect her final payment. Instead, she would find herself in a room with Meridian's executives, Maya, Elena, and representatives from both companies' legal departments. The beauty of this approach, Patricia explained, is that we'll have her committing fraud against multiple parties simultaneously. She'll be impersonating you to collect payment from Meridian, while also preparing to impersonate you at Richardson Associates the next day. The coordination between these activities will demonstrate the systematic nature of her scheme.
Maya spent the following week living a carefully choreographed performance. She maintained her normal work routine while secretly coordinating with Elena and Patricia to monitor Zara's activities. Every email she sent and every calendar appointment she made was designed to provide Zara with information that would lure her deeper into the trap they were setting. The psychological strain of the week was enormous. Maya had to pretend that everything was normal while knowing that her sister was simultaneously studying her communications and preparing to impersonate her at two crucial professional meetings. Every interaction with colleagues carried the weight of wondering whether they were comparing her to Zara's performance or questioning discrepancies they had noticed. Elena's surveillance reports throughout the week painted a picture of Zara's activities that was both fascinating and disturbing. Zara had been staying at an expensive hotel in downtown Seattle using a credit card that Elena's financial investigation suggested was funded by her fraudulent consulting income. She had been visiting Maya's office building during lunch hours and after hours, apparently studying the layout and observing Maya's colleagues to refine her impersonation strategy. Most chillingly, Elena had documented Zara conducting what appeared to be rehearsals of the presentation she would need to give to Richardson Associates. Security footage from the hotel business center showed her practicing Maya's mannerisms and speech patterns while reviewing materials that could only have come from Maya's private files. "She's treating this like a professional acting role," Elena reported during one of their evening coordination meetings. "The level of preparation and attention to detail suggests she's been planning these specific meetings for weeks, possibly months." By Wednesday evening, Maya felt like she was living in a psychological thriller where she was both the victim and the protagonist, setting a trap for her own identical twin. The surreal nature of the situation was almost harder to process than the betrayal itself. She was preparing to publicly expose someone who shared her face, her voice, and her genetic code, but who had chosen to use those similarities to systematically destroy her life. Thursday morning arrived gray and drizzly, typical Seattle weather that matched Maya's mood as she prepared for the confrontation that would change everything. She dressed carefully in a navy blue suit that she knew Zara would also be wearing since they had similar professional wardrobes and Zara had been studying Maya's appearance for over a year. The Hartwell Industries building was a gleaming tower in the financial district, the kind of prestigious location that represented exactly the type of client relationship Maya had been working to build throughout her career. The irony that she was walking into this building to expose her sister's theft of those very aspirations was not lost on her. Elena met Maya in the lobby, carrying a briefcase full of documentation and wearing the confident expression of someone who had spent weeks preparing for this moment. They were joined by Patricia Webb and two representatives from Meridian's legal department, creating a small army of witnesses who would ensure that everything was properly documented.
The conference room where they waited for Zara was on the 32nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a spectacular view of Elliott Bay. Maya found herself staring out at the water, thinking about how this view represented the kind of professional success she had been working toward her entire career. The fact that her sister had been experiencing similar moments in similar rooms while stealing Maya's identity added another layer of violation to an already devastating betrayal. Zara arrived precisely on time, which Maya recognized as a calculated choice designed to project professionalism and competence. She walked into the conference room wearing the navy suit Maya had expected, carrying a leather portfolio that Maya recognized as one she had given Zara for Christmas 3 years earlier, and projecting the kind of confident authority that Maya had always struggled to embody. For a moment that felt suspended in time, the two sisters stared at each other across the conference room table. Zara's expression shifted from confident anticipation to confusion to dawning horror as she realized that Maya was not supposed to be there. The carefully constructed facade of professional competence cracked visibly as Zara processed the presence of lawyers, investigators, and Meridian executives who were all staring at her with expressions of barely contained fascination. "I believe there's been some mistake," Zara said, her voice carrying only the slightest tremor. "I'm here for my presentation meeting with Meridian Industries." Patricia Webb stood up from her seat at the head of the table, consulting a legal pad covered with notes.
Miss Chen, could you please state your full legal name for the record? Zara's eyes darted around the room, clearly calculating her options. I'm Maya Chen. I'm here to present my market expansion strategy recommendations. Interesting, Patricia continued, because according to our investigation, Maya Chen is sitting right here beside me. Could you explain how there appear to be two Maya Chens in this room? The silence that followed lasted approximately 15 seconds, but it felt like an eternity to Maya. She watched her sister's face cycle through a range of expressions, from defiant confidence to desperate calculation to something approaching panic. Zara was clearly trying to formulate an explanation that could account for the impossible situation she found herself in. I think there's been a serious misunderstanding, Zara finally said, her voice stronger now as she settled on a strategy. My name is Zara Chen. I'm Maya's identical twin sister. Maya asked me to attend this meeting on her behalf because she's dealing with a family emergency. I have all of her research and strategy recommendations. Maya felt a familiar surge of frustrated rage at Zara's ability to lie smoothly even when confronted with overwhelming evidence. It was the same skill that had allowed her to escape consequences throughout their childhood, the ability to construct plausible alternate explanations for inexplicable situations. That's interesting, Elena said, opening her briefcase and pulling out a stack of documents. Because according to these hotel records, you've been registered under the name Maya Chen for the past week, and according to these financial records, all payments for this consulting project have been made to Maya Chen's business account, which you've been controlling. Elena spread the evidence across the conference table like playing cards in a winning hand. Bank statements, hotel registrations, email communications, and login records that painted an undeniable picture of systematic identity theft. Zara stared at the documentation, her face growing paler as she realized the scope of what they had discovered. Additionally, Patricia added, we have video surveillance footage of you entering Richardson Associates using Maya's employee credentials and attending meetings where you represented yourself as Maya Chen to her colleagues and supervisors. The Meridian executives had been silent throughout this exchange, but their CEO, Robert Chen, no relation despite the shared surname, finally spoke up. Ms. Chen, whichever Ms. Chen you actually are, could you explain how you gained access to the proprietary research and strategic analysis that formed the basis of your consulting proposal? Zara looked directly at Maya for the first time since the confrontation began. Her expression was no longer calculating or defiant. Instead, Maya saw something she had never seen in her sister's face before: genuine fear. Zara was finally realizing that her carefully constructed scheme was collapsing and that the consequences were going to be real and severe. Maya is my identical twin sister. We've always shared everything. I didn't think she would mind if I used some of her ideas for freelance work. I was going to share the profits with her. You didn't think I would mind that you've been impersonating me at my job, stealing credit for my work, and earning money using my professional credentials? You didn't think I would mind that you've been systematically destroying my career while building your own fake reputation? It wasn't supposed to hurt you, Zara said, and for the first time her voice sounded genuinely emotional rather than calculated. I was just trying to make some money while you were succeeding at your regular job. I thought we both could benefit. Benefit? Maya's voice rose despite her efforts to maintain professional composure. You convinced my boss that I was having memory problems when he called to ask why I missed a meeting I was never invited to. You made the senior partners question my professional competence by delivering presentations that contradicted my usual communication style. You've been positioning yourself for my promotion while making me look unreliable and unstable. Patricia intervened before the confrontation could escalate further. Ms. Zara Chen, you should be aware that based on the evidence we've gathered, you're facing potential criminal charges for identity theft, wire fraud, and computer fraud. Additionally, both Richardson and Associates and Meridian Industries will be pursuing civil litigation for damages resulting from your fraudulent activities. The legal consequences Patricia outlined were comprehensive and severe. The financial damages alone could result in restitution requirements that would bankrupt Zara and potentially require her to forfeit any assets she had acquired through her fraudulent consulting work.
The criminal charges could result in federal prison time and permanent damage to her ability to work in any professional capacity. But for Maya, the legal consequences were less important than the psychological victory of finally exposing the truth. She had spent 18 months feeling confused, frustrated, and increasingly isolated as her professional world became distorted by Zara's interference. The validation of knowing that she hadn't been imagining the inconsistencies and that her instincts had been correct was worth more than any financial settlement. "I want to know why," Maya said, her voice calm now, despite the emotional turmoil she felt. "We're identical twins. We had the same opportunities, the same education, the same family support. Why did you choose to steal my life instead of building your own?" Zara looked at her sister with an expression that mixed desperation with something that might have been genuine remorse. "Because you were always better at it than I was. You were always the smart one, the responsible one, the one who worked harder and achieved more. I wanted what you had, but I didn't want to do the work to earn it myself." The honesty of Zara's answer was both satisfying and heartbreaking. Maya realized that her sister's elaborate deception had been motivated not by malice, but by a twisted combination of envy and laziness. Zara had wanted the rewards of Maya's success without the effort required to achieve it legitimately. "So you decided to steal it instead," Maya said. "I decided to borrow it," Zara corrected. "I thought I could use your reputation and credentials to establish myself professionally, and then eventually I would develop my own client base and expertise. I didn't think it would hurt you because you had your regular job at Richardson Associates." Maya stared at her sister, realizing that Zara genuinely didn't understand the full impact of her actions. She had compartmentalized the fraud in her own mind, treating Maya's professional identity as a resource to be shared, rather than something that could be damaged or destroyed by unauthorized use. The meeting concluded with Zara being escorted from the building by security, while Elena coordinated with law enforcement officers who had been waiting outside. Maya watched her sister walk away in handcuffs, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction, sadness, and relief that the 18-month nightmare was finally ending. The aftermath of Zara's exposure unfolded over the following weeks with an efficiency that surprised Maya. The criminal charges proceeded quickly due to the comprehensive evidence Elena had gathered. Zara pled guilty to multiple counts of identity theft and fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence that included 2 years in federal prison, 5 years of probation, and restitution payments that would continue for the rest of her life. The civil litigation resulted in Zara forfeiting all assets she had acquired through her fraudulent consulting work, including the money she had earned from Meridian Industries and several other clients Elena's investigation had identified. Maya was awarded damages that more than compensated for the financial impact of her sister's crimes, but the money felt less important than the public vindication of her professional reputation. Richardson Associates conducted an internal review that cleared Maya of any wrongdoing and resulted in her immediate promotion to associate director, the position that Zara had been attempting to steal through her impersonation scheme. Marcus Richardson personally apologized for doubting Maya's version of events and implemented new security protocols to prevent similar incidents in the future. The story of the identical twin identity theft became something of a legend in Seattle's business community, serving as both a cautionary tale about digital security and a reminder that the most sophisticated fraud could come from the people closest to you. Maya found herself receiving speaking invitations from professional organizations and security conferences, sharing her experience as a way to help others recognize and prevent similar crimes. 6 months after Zara's conviction, Maya stood in her new corner office at Richardson Associates, looking out at the same view of Elliott Bay that had provided the backdrop for her sister's final deception.
The associate director position had exceeded her expectations, providing not only the financial security and professional recognition she had worked toward, but also a sense of personal empowerment that came from having survived and overcome such a comprehensive betrayal. Maya had not spoken to Zara since the confrontation at Meridian Industries, and she had no plans to visit her sister in prison or maintain contact during her incarceration. The relationship that had defined the first 26 years of Maya's life had ended in that conference room when Zara chose to continue lying even when faced with undeniable evidence of her crimes. But Maya had gained something unexpected from the experience. The process of investigating, exposing, and prosecuting her sister's fraud had taught her to trust her own instincts and advocate for herself with a confidence she had never possessed before. The twin who had spent her entire life being overshadowed and undermined by her identical sister had emerged as someone capable of fighting for her own interests and winning. The piano that had belonged to Nai, their grandmother, who had seen through Zara's manipulations years before anyone else, now sat in Maya's living room. Maya had finally claimed her inheritance, proving that she had achieved something entirely on her own merit, something that couldn't be stolen or replicated. She played it most evenings, filling her apartment with music that sounded like peace, justice, and the quiet satisfaction of a life reclaimed. Elena Vasquez had become more than just a private investigator. She had become a friend who understood the unique psychological challenges of being victimized by a family member. They met for coffee every few weeks, conversations that helped Maya process the complex emotions of loving someone while also ensuring they faced consequences for their actions. The question that people asked Maya most frequently was whether she thought Zara would ever truly understand the impact of her actions or feel genuine remorse for the pain she had caused. Maya's answer evolved over time, but eventually settled into something like acceptance of uncertainty. She had learned that she couldn't control Zara's understanding or remorse, only her own response to what had happened. Maya's story had become a testament to the power of refusing to accept gaslighting and manipulation, even when it came from someone who shared your face and your family. She had chosen to believe her own experience over her sister's denials, to seek evidence rather than accept explanations, and to fight for her own truth, even when it meant destroying a relationship that had defined her entire life. The girl who had once lay broken at the bottom of stairs while her family laughed had grown into a woman who refused to be anyone's victim. Maya Can had reclaimed not just her identity and her career, but her fundamental right to exist in the world as herself, without apology or explanation. The weeks following Zara's arrest passed in a blur of legal meetings, insurance claims, and the slow process of rebuilding professional relationships that had been damaged by 18 months of deception. Maya found herself navigating a complex emotional landscape where relief competed with grief, satisfaction battled with exhaustion, and the strange freedom of finally being believed warred with the lingering trauma of systematic betrayal. Patricia Webb had been right about the complexity of prosecuting family-based identity theft. Despite the overwhelming evidence, Zara's defense attorney had initially attempted to argue that the twins have always shared resources and that Maya had implicitly consented to Zara's use of her professional identity. The argument fell apart quickly when Elena presented recordings of Maya's confused phone calls to various companies, trying to understand charges and appointments she had never authorized. But the legal process still required months of depositions, expert testimony, and psychological evaluations. The psychological evaluation component had been particularly challenging for Maya. Court-appointed experts needed to establish that she and Zara were distinct individuals with separate professional identities, rather than two parts of some shared persona that might justify Zara's claims about implied consent. Maya had spent hours in sterile offices, answering questions about her sister's childhood behavior, their educational differences, and the timeline of their professional divergence. Dr. Sarah Martinez, the forensic psychologist assigned to the case, had explained that identity theft between identical twins represented a unique category of crime that challenged traditional assumptions about personal identity and autonomous decision-making. The psychological profile that emerged from her evaluation painted a picture of Zara as someone with narcissistic personality traits who had never developed a stable sense of individual identity separate from her relationship with Maya. Your sister appears to have a fundamentally different understanding of personal boundaries than most people. She genuinely seems to believe that your achievements and professional reputation were resources that should naturally be available to her, rather than properties that belonged exclusively to you.
The insight had been both illuminating and disturbing. Maya realized that Zara's theft hadn't been motivated by simple greed or malice, but by a deeply distorted worldview where the boundaries between self and other, especially between identical twins, were essentially meaningless. Zara had convinced herself that Maya's success was partly hers by right of genetic similarity and shared upbringing. Understanding Zara's psychological motivation didn't make the betrayal any less painful, but it did help Maya make sense of behaviors that had seemed incomprehensibly cruel. Zara hadn't set out to destroy Maya's life. She had simply failed to recognize that Maya's life was separate from her own in any meaningful way. The media attention surrounding the case had been both helpful and intrusive. Several journalists had picked up the story as an example of how digital technology could enable new forms of traditional crimes, and Maya had found herself quoted in articles about cybersecurity, workplace fraud, and the psychology of family crime. The publicity had been valuable for establishing the public record of her victimization, but it had also meant months of unwanted attention and speculation about her family dynamics. Maya's parents had struggled to process their daughter's situation with anything approaching objectivity. David and Linda Chen had initially responded to Zara's arrest with disbelief, then anger at Maya for involving law enforcement in what they saw as a family matter that should have been resolved privately. Their suggestion that Maya should drop the charges and work things out with her sister directly had been the final straw in a relationship that had been strained for years. "You're destroying your sister's life over a misunderstanding," her mother had said during what turned out to be their last conversation. "She made some poor choices, but she's still your twin sister. How can you send her to prison?" Maya's response had been simple and final. "She spent 18 months systematically stealing my professional identity and undermining my career. The fact that she's my sister makes it worse, not better. She had opportunities that no outside criminal could ever have, and she used every single one of them to hurt me." The conversation had ended with Linda Chen hanging up on her daughter, and neither parent had contacted Maya since. The loss of her family relationships had been devastating in a different way than Zara's betrayal. Maya had expected loyalty and manipulation from her sister, but she had hoped her parents might eventually understand the seriousness of what had happened and support her decision to seek justice. Instead, they had chosen to frame Maya as the aggressor in a situation where she had been the victim, suggesting that her refusal to accept continued abuse made her the problem rather than the person seeking a solution. The dynamic was painfully familiar from childhood when Maya's complaints about Zara's behavior had been dismissed as jealousy or troublemaking rather than legitimate grievances about unfair treatment. Elena Vasquez had helped Maya understand that her parents' response was actually quite common in cases involving family crime. Many families prioritized maintaining relationships over acknowledging wrongdoing, even when the wrongdoing was severe enough to warrant criminal prosecution. The desire to avoid scandal or family disruption often led to pressure on victims to minimize their experiences or accept continued abuse for the sake of family unity. Your parents are asking you to sacrifice your safety and well-being to protect your sister from the consequences of her choices, Elena had explained. That's not actually love or family loyalty. That's enabling criminal behavior at your expense.
The insight had been liberating in a way Maya hadn't expected. She had spent months feeling guilty about the impact of Zara's prosecution on their family, wondering if she should have found some way to resolve the situation privately. Elena's perspective helped her understand that the family disruption had been caused by Zara's criminal behavior, not by Maya's decision to report it. Maya's professional life had stabilized and flourished in ways that surprised everyone, including herself. The associate director position at Richardson Associates had provided Maya with a platform to implement some of the strategic thinking that Zara had been stealing and misrepresenting. Without the confusion and self-doubt that had plagued her during the period of impersonation, Maya's work had reached a new level of confidence and innovation. Marcus Richardson had become something more than just a supportive boss. He had become a mentor who understood the unique challenges Maya had faced and was committed to helping her rebuild her professional reputation. The company's response to the identity theft had been comprehensive, including new security protocols, employee training about impersonation fraud, and a clear policy about supporting employees who became victims of workplace-related crimes. "What happened to you was unprecedented in my experience," Marcus had told Maya during one of their regular check-in meetings. "But your response to it has been extraordinary. You've turned a devastating attack on your professional identity into an opportunity to demonstrate leadership, problem-solving skills, and personal resilience that most people never have to develop." The praise had been meaningful not just because it came from someone whose professional opinion Maya respected, but because it represented a recognition of qualities that had developed as a direct result of surviving Zara's betrayal. Maya had discovered capabilities within herself that might never have emerged under normal circumstances. The speaking engagements that had resulted from media coverage of her case had evolved into a secondary career that Maya found deeply fulfilling. She had developed presentations about identity theft prevention, workplace security, and the psychology of family-based crime that were in demand at conferences, universities, and professional organizations across the country. The opportunity to help other people recognize and respond to similar situations had given Maya's experience a sense of purpose that transcended personal vindication. She had received dozens of letters and emails from people who had recognized elements of their own family dynamics in her story, and several had gone on to seek help for situations they had previously accepted as normal sibling rivalry or family drama. One letter that had particularly affected Maya came from a woman whose identical twin sister had been impersonating her on dating websites and social media, creating romantic relationships and financial obligations that the victim knew nothing about until angry creditors and confused boyfriends began contacting her. The woman had been afraid to report the situation because she didn't think anyone would believe that such elaborate deception was possible between family members. "Reading about your case gave me the courage to document what was happening and contact law enforcement," the woman had written. "I realized that what I was experiencing wasn't normal twin behavior or family drama. It was systematic identity theft, and I deserved protection just like any other victim of fraud." Maya had framed that letter and kept it in her office as a reminder that her decision to prosecute Zara had created precedent and awareness that could help other people in similar situations. The financial restitution from Zara's conviction had allowed Maya to purchase a house in the Queen Anne neighborhood, a small craftsman bungalow with a view of the Space Needle and enough space for a proper home office. The process of buying her first home had been both exciting and melancholy, representing the kind of major life milestone that she had always imagined sharing with family members who were no longer part of her life. Maya had furnished the house carefully, choosing pieces that reflected her own taste rather than family hand-downs or gifts that carried emotional complications. The piano that belonged to Nai held the place of honor in the living room, but everything else was new, selected specifically for Maya Slice as an independent adult who had chosen her own path.
The garden had become Maya's new passion, a hobby that provided both physical activity and the satisfaction of creating something beautiful through patient effort. She had planted vegetables, herbs, and flowers that would bloom at different times throughout the year, creating a space that would provide ongoing evidence of growth and renewal. Gardening had also become a metaphor that Maya used in her speaking engagements about recovery from family trauma. She would explain how healing required the same kind of patient cultivation as growing plants, with attention to soil conditions, appropriate nutrients, and protection from environmental threats that could damage new growth. You can't rush the process, she would tell audiences. Healing happens in seasons, and sometimes you have to clear away damaged growth before new growth can flourish. The goal isn't to pretend that the damage never happened, but to create conditions where something healthy and authentic can develop. Elena Vasquez had become not just a professional contact, but a genuine friend whose understanding of complex family dynamics provided Maya with emotional support that was both practical and deeply empathetic. They met regularly for coffee or dinner, conversations that ranged from updates on Czar's incarceration to broader discussions about justice, forgiveness, and the challenge of building authentic relationships after experiencing systematic betrayal. Elena's perspective on Maya's situation was informed by years of investigating family-based crimes, and she had helped Maya understand that her experience, while extreme in its sophistication and duration, was part of a larger pattern of family dysfunction that affected millions of people who never sought help or legal recourse. Most people who experience what you experienced never report it, Elena had explained. They accept ongoing abuse because they can't imagine that law enforcement would take family crime seriously, or because they've been convinced that family loyalty requires accepting unlimited mistreatment. Elena's friendship had also helped Maya develop new criteria for evaluating relationships and personal boundaries. Having survived such comprehensive deception from someone who shared her genetic code and childhood history, Maya had become extraordinarily good at recognizing manipulation, gaslighting, and other forms of emotional abuse in their early stages. The skill had been both protective and isolating. Maya found that she could spot dishonesty and manipulative behavior with an accuracy that sometimes made social interactions uncomfortable. She had developed a hypervigilance about personal boundaries that served her well professionally, but sometimes made casual relationships more challenging. Dr. Martinez had explained that this hypervigilance was a normal response to systematic betrayal, and that learning to calibrate appropriate levels of trust and openness would be an ongoing process rather than a one-time achievement. The goal wasn't to return to the naive trust that had made Maya vulnerable to Czar's manipulation, but to develop discriminating judgment that could distinguish between reasonable caution and excessive suspicion. Maya's romantic life had been complicated by her experience in ways that were both predictable and surprising. The men she dated often struggled to understand how someone could be victimized so comprehensively by a family member, and their responses ranged from excessive sympathy that made her feel like a victim rather than a survivor, to skepticism that suggested they thought she must have been somehow complicit in her sister's crimes. The relationship that had developed with James Morrison, a software security consultant she had met at a cybersecurity conference, had been different from the beginning. James understood both the technical aspects of identity theft and the psychological complexity of family betrayal, and his response to Maya's story had been neither excessive sympathy nor skepticism, but professional respect for how she had handled an impossible situation. "What impresses me isn't that you survived what your sister did to you," James had said during one of their early conversations. "What impresses me is that you figured out how to document it, investigate it, and prosecute it successfully. Most people in your situation would have spent years doubting their own perceptions and never gotten the evidence they needed to prove what was happening." James's perspective had helped Maya reframe her experience from something that had happened to her to something she had actively solved. The distinction was psychologically important because it emphasized her agency and competence rather than her victimization and vulnerability.
Their relationship had developed slowly, with careful attention to trust building and communication that reflected Maya's need for transparency and authenticity in all her personal connections. James had been patient with Maya's hypervigilance about boundaries and her need to verify information independently rather than simply accepting assurances about intentions or feelings. The annual updates Maya received about Zara's incarceration had been both routine and emotionally complex. Zara was serving her sentence at a federal facility in California, participating in vocational training programs, and apparently adapting well to prison life. The reports suggested that she had developed some insight into her behavior and was working with a psychologist to understand the thinking patterns that had led to her criminal choices. Maya felt no desire to visit her sister or resume any form of communication, but she also didn't feel the ongoing anger that she had expected to experience. The emotion that had replaced anger was something closer to indifference, a recognition that Zara was now someone else's responsibility and no longer a threat to Maya's well-being or professional security. The transformation from fury to indifference had been gradual and surprising. Maya had expected to remain angry for years, possibly for the rest of her life. Instead, she had discovered that successful prosecution and comprehensive vindication had allowed her to release the emotional energy that had been consumed by fighting for recognition and justice. Dr. Martinez had explained that this emotional evolution was common among people who successfully prosecuted family members for serious crimes. The anger that sustained them through the legal process often dissipated once justice was achieved and safety was restored, leaving space for other emotions and priorities to emerge. Maya's 30th birthday had been a milestone that she celebrated with deliberate intention and profound gratitude. The party she hosted in her new house had been attended by colleagues, friends, and chosen family members who represented the life she had built after surviving systematic betrayal. The contrast with previous birthdays, which had been complicated by family drama and Zara's competitive behavior, was stark and liberating. Elena had given a toast that evening that captured something essential about Maya's journey from victim to survivor to someone who had transformed her trauma into a source of strength and service to others. The toast had moved Maya to tears, not because it reminded her of what she had lost, but because it celebrated what she had gained. The courage to trust her own perceptions, the strength to seek justice despite family pressure, the wisdom to build new relationships based on mutual respect rather than genetic obligation. Maya's story had become a testament to the possibility of rebuilding a life after comprehensive betrayal. She had learned that family was something you could choose rather than something you were stuck with, that justice was worth pursuing even when it was difficult and expensive, and that the courage to trust your own perceptions was the foundation of all genuine healing. The question people asked Maya most frequently was whether she would ever forgive her sister or attempt to rebuild their relationship after Zara's release from prison. Maya's answer had evolved over time, but had settled into something like philosophical acceptance of uncertainty. Forgiveness isn't something I owe anyone. It's something I might choose for my own benefit, but only if it serves my healing rather than enabling continued dysfunction. Right now, the healthiest choice for me is to focus on building the life I want rather than managing the damage from the life I escaped. Maya's house had become a sanctuary that reflected her values, priorities, and aesthetic preferences without compromise or negotiation with anyone else's opinions. The walls were painted in colors she loved, the books on the shelves were ones she actually wanted to read, and the music that filled the space was chosen for her own enjoyment rather than family harmony. The sense of authentic ownership over her environment had been more emotionally significant than Maya had anticipated. For the first time in her life, she was living in a space that belonged entirely to her, decorated according to her preferences, and governed by her own standards of comfort and beauty. Maya Chen had become someone who trusted her own judgment, valued her own opinions, and refused to accept treatment that diminished her sense of self-worth. The girl who had once been confused and gaslighted by her identical twin had grown into a woman who could recognize manipulation in its earliest stages and respond with confidence and clarity. The transformation had required losing almost everything she had once considered permanent about her identity: her family relationships, her naive trust in genetic loyalty, and her assumption that love meant accepting unlimited mistreatment from people who claimed to care about her. But what she had gained was more valuable than what she had lost: authentic relationships based on mutual respect, professional success built on her own merit, and the deep satisfaction of knowing that she would never again accept systematic abuse from anyone regardless of their relationship to her or their claims about love and family loyalty. Maya's life had become a testament to the possibility of creating authentic happiness after surviving comprehensive betrayal. She had learned that family was something you could choose rather than something you were stuck with, that justice was worth pursuing even when it was difficult and expensive, and that the courage to trust your own perceptions was the foundation of all genuine healing. The woman who had once stood in her kitchen holding a cup of coffee, confused and disoriented by her boss's phone call about a meeting she had never scheduled, had become someone who would never again doubt her own version of reality when confronted with gaslighting or manipulation. Maya Chen had reclaimed not just her professional identity and financial security, but her fundamental right to exist in the world as herself, without apology, explanation, or compromise with people who wanted to use her identity for their own purposes. The girl who had been systematically betrayed by her identical twin had grown into a woman who would never again be anyone's victim. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.